It is Tuesday, April 22nd. This is The Signal. I'm Bernice Hillier in Corner Brook, filling in for Adam Walsh. Today is Earth Day, and we wanted to dig into that topic by exploring the basics, not the science, but the action. How can one person make a difference in protecting our planet? Well, for those of you who care and want to make a difference, we wanted to check in with some experts today on the show to see what action might look like for individuals and also the limit that one person can't save the world. But what does action look like for cities, for companies, for organizations? We are diving into the practical boots on the ground action on climate change. If you have some questions or want to be part of the conversation, maybe you want to share what you've been doing to protect our planet. Maybe you have some questions for our experts on what kind of a difference you can make. Give us a call. 1-800-563-8255 is the number from anywhere in Newfoundland and Labrador. 1-800-563-8255. Or you can give us a call, 709-722-7111. Now, there are other ways to get in touch, so you can't say we're not providing lots of options today. You can text us during the show with your thoughts and share them that way. 709-327-8206 is our text line, and we will get that and then be able to read your text on the air. So 709-327-8206, or you can send us an email. The email address for The Signal is thesignal@cbc.ca. So get those calls in early. Everyone always waits and has a chance to listen, and then they realize that we're quickly running out of time in an hour-long show. Well, let's introduce to you our experts in studio this afternoon. We have Sheila O'Leary in studio. She is a city councillor in St. John's, the deputy mayor of St. John's, and the sustainability lead for the city. And she's going to tell us about, I guess, how she got started with environmentalism long before she was a city councillor. Good afternoon to you, Sheila.
Good afternoon, and thanks so much for the invitation.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm thinking we're going to have a really good discussion and get into some really great practical tips for people on what they can do. We're also joined in studio in St. John's by Ashley Smith. She is owner and managing director of Fundamental Incorporated, which is a climate action consulting firm based here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Good afternoon to you, Ashley.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. And a guest that I had hoped would be sitting across from me in studio here in Corner Brook, but I'm so pleased that she's in St. John's and joining us that way. Camille Ouellette-Dallaire is an assistant professor at the Grenfell Campus Memorial University. She has a PhD in geography, and she's joining us from our St. John's studio. Good afternoon, Camille.
Hi. Sorry not to be in the West Coast today, but a pleasure to be here.
We will definitely take a rain check and have you in the Corner Brook studio at some other time.
Of course.
So let's talk about, I think I remember when Earth Day started. No, I don't remember when Earth Day started, do I? It's been actually going on for decades, but I remember hearing about it in the late 1980s, probably in high school. And I'm wondering, Sheila, if we could start with you, what does Earth Day even mean now in 2025?
You know what? This is such a broad spectrum of what we do with Earth Day. But, obviously as a deputy mayor, I speak from a corporate kind of climate action perspective. But as an individual, I've been a long time environmentalist, I call it. Of course, now it's climate activist. Things continue to move forward. It's just, really about taking personal responsibility for, our piece of the pie. And obviously, there's a lot of work that has to be done in leadership roles. But everybody has a role to play when it comes to sustainability and making, a safe, healthy community for us all.
Ashley, what does Earth Day mean to you? How has it, I guess, your understanding of it and appreciation for it and the importance you place on it evolved over the years?
It's a really good question. I think similar to Sheila, that like being environmentally minded or sustainability minded has always been one of my core personal values. And I've been really fortunate to be able to operate a consulting business doing the things that have the impact that I think are needed. And so for me, Earth Day is just an opportunity to celebrate all the clients who come to me and want to make a difference, and we work together to have a community impact.
And Ashley, just so people understand where you fit into the discussion, what kind of assistance can you provide to companies who come to you and they want to do what's right for the environment? They don't want to be contributing to, the warming of the climate and the continued deterioration of our planet.
So we offer several services, and we take a pretty broad definition as to what climate action constitutes. So we cover everything from doing GHG emissions for municipalities as well as not-for-profits and for-profit organizations. We do climate action planning around strategic carbon reductions and carbon management plans, and we do climate vulnerability analyses and climate adaptation plans. We also do proposal writing, and we support affordable housing that's net zero. And we also work in what we call an eco-asset management framework, which is essentially aimed at supporting decision makers make decisions with climate-conscious metrics.
Okay. And I want to reference GHG. That didn't immediately come to my mind what you were talking about. Greenhouse gases, of course. So
Yes.
Our listeners are aware of what you're talking about. They're reducing greenhouse gases. Camille, I want to bring you into the conversation as a researcher, as someone who holds a PhD in geography and who teaches at Grenfell Campus Memorial University. What does Earth Day represent for you?
Well, for me, Earth Day is a mix of both personal responsibility, but also thinking about the bigger systemic issue that we're facing. Like, for example, when we're thinking about climate change, well, there's a big part of carbon emission that are directly associated with companies, right? So some of it is, yes, on us as individuals, but it's also asking for accountability for people like companies and government to make sure that we're moving forward as a group, not just all of us in our little houses. So for me, Earth Day is about remembering that climate change, yes, it's something that we can all do something about, but also that it's something that is much, much bigger than ourselves.
And Camille, for you, what does taking climate action look like? You know, for an individual person, what would you say to someone if they say to you, well, what can one person even do, really?
I think one of the key principle is really thinking about reducing the consumption, right? Like the whole 4 R's, I don't know if you have that in English, but in French, we were hammered down with that when we were younger, right? Reduce, recycle, reuse, and all that. But I think sometimes we tend to focus on the recycling and potentially reducing, but really at the get-go, the most important thing, in my opinion, is really to reduce our consumption. Go back and buy secondhand, reduce our consumption of plastics, and reduce our consumption of food, find ways to be more efficient in how we go about that. But also, it's about like voting where our mind is. It's also thinking about who do we think is going to be in power that's going to support climate action to make sure that the most vulnerable people around us can also be supported in their climate transition.
All right, Sheila, what about for you? What would you say climate action looks like for the individual?
Well, first of all, I can't agree more with what you've just said, so thank you for that. Yes, we all have a personal responsibility, but yes, we need to task our leaders. And, you know, as somebody who stepped up to be a leader, I speak very loudly about climate action. And the City of St. John's actually has been very proactive in recent years with a Resilient St. John's climate plan. We have a couple of really fabulous employees at the city who are working very hard to decarbonize our own footprint, to ensure that our carbon emissions from our buildings, to electrify bus fleets, to get EV charger stations going. All of these things which are going to basically reduce us so that we take personal responsibility at the corporate level. But also, you know, we still need to take responsibility at the personal level. And exactly as you said, you know, reducing at the start. It's like starting, you know, the consumption aspect is really, really key. And as somebody who was a very loud advocate of banning the single-use plastic bags in the province, banning, you know, cosmetic pesticides, unnecessary cosmetic pesticides, you know, developing tree policies in the city, all of these things make a difference.
Sheila, I want to ask you, you talked about how this is called the Resilient St. John's Climate Plan, I think you called it. Mm-hmm. How do you feel protecting the climate, protecting the environment, plays into making St. John's resilient?
Well, you know what? What's beautiful about your guests that you've invited today is that we're talking not only about data and research, but we're talking about economies here. And, you know, what Ashley's talking about here, I mean, we can talk about saving the planet, and that sounds like a wonderful idea, and it's very ethereal. But until it actually hits people in the pocketbook, or that people are responding to natural disasters like we've seen in our province in recent times, are people really starting to understand the message that we have to work at the top level and speak to the leaders. And certainly for me personally, that's why I signed on, certainly with the Climate Caucus, with the Elbows Up for Climate Action, to task our federal leaders to say, we need bold action. Who's stepping up?
Ashley, for you, what would you say to an individual person who talks to you and says, you know, well, what does climate action mean for me as an individual citizen in this country?
So it can definitely seem overwhelming. And in those moments, I always go back to a poem by Rumi that says, you are not a drop in the ocean. You are in the entire ocean in a single drop. And so the idea that, you know, a stream or a river forms because infinite number of water molecules flow in one direction to create a main stream. And so if you take that at like a philosophical level, you can understand that you can act on multiple levels in order to see the change. So you can leverage your personal consumer choices, as Cami noted. You can avoid buying things that have plastic packaging. You can buy local. You can use the MapleScan app to buy Canadian. You can avoid using saran wrap. You can, you can do those kinds of things. And then you can also talk to people like Sheila, who are very willing and able and wanting to listen to their constituents about what's important and how we make this work. And it's always a balance, you know. I mean, you can't, whether you're running a company or a municipality or anything, like you can't tank it financially in order to hit a carbon goal. Like that is not that's the opposite of good, mm-hmm. right? But when it comes down to it, you have to find that balance and you have to have those hard conversations and you have to add into your decision-making, both personally and in your role within whatever organization you're working for, that sort of climate lens, right? Like is there a choice here that has lower embodied carbon? Is there a choice here that will increase resilience to some vulnerability to climate change? Is there a choice here that improves a vulnerable sector? Because if we do it this way, they are supported. If we do it this way, they aren't, but we still result at the same end goal. And it's those kind of evaluations that every individual is able to make, both at a household level and within their roles in their organizations.
We're talking, today is Earth Day. We're talking about climate change and the kinds of action that individuals and cities and communities can undertake. We are interested in hearing from you, so you can give us a call if you have any questions, if you want to be part of this conversation about Earth Day, about climate change and the action needed to help our planet. You can give us a call, 1-800-563-8255, or you can call 709-722-7111. You can text to us during the show, 709-327-8206, or you can email thesignal@cbc.ca. I feel like all three of you have mentioned, the need to reduce. I'm wondering about recycling, because we hear a lot about that in our schools and even in our homes. We talk about what we're doing and we think we're doing a good thing by recycling, and for sure we are. Sheila, I wonder though, do you get a lot of comments from people who really doubt that the recycling they're doing in their municipality is making any difference?
Yeah, certainly. There's a lot of skepticism around that. And I recall, I've been in municipal politics now for almost 14 years. And I remember coming onto council when we were just starting to establish a recycling program. So excited about it because it was long overdue. But it's not the be-all, end-all. I mean, we want people to recycle. Absolutely, we do. But the reality is we have to get off plastics, and we have to stop the production of plastics. And that's a really complicated and a difficult conversation to have in this province where we are is still heavily engaged in the oil industry and economy. And as I've mentioned before, we really do, and I think Ashley has spoken to it as well too. It's based on economy, so we can't approach it in this binary kind of fashion. We really have to look at how we are transitioning to move away from that so that we can continue to support our economy, but ensure that our children and our grandchildren, that we're actually leaving something for people and we're not leaving a disaster behind. So, we have to be responsible, but we do know that it's not going to be an overnight action. But we have to continue to talk about it. And right now, while we're electing federal leaders and soon provincial leaders, and after that, municipal leaders, we need to have those voices out there to ensure that this conversation just continues to grow.
Ashley, what kind of conversations do you have with the companies that your company works with when it comes to recycling? Do they feel that's something they need to embrace? Are there more, other ways that they're looking at that they feel might be more effective?
Recycling is always one of the things that comes up, especially with municipalities. And in this case, with recycling, the tipping fee per ton for recycling is about a quarter of the price of the tipping fee for landfill. And so from especially a small community, that's almost an order of magnitude difference in what their tipping fees would be if they can get to maximum recycling. And so that's definitely something that you want to push towards. I am always in favor of reducing, in the sense that make choices where the plastics are not a part of packaging or maybe not a part of the choice, especially with single use. A stable, really long-term plastics that that are durable, like water bottles, like Nalgene. That's just one example. There's lots of companies. Those plastics for me are less of an issue as you're drinking out of your plastic water bottle. Yep.
I've got mine here in the studio.
Yeah, so those are less of an issue because those are very stable. They're reusable. They're durable. The issue is more about the single use, the packaging. So Saran wrap and Ziploc bags when you only use them once, and all of the wrappers on all the kids' snacks. And it's really hard to figure out how to get away from that. And so I agree with Sheila that, again, the logic that you kind of have to act on all the levels. That you can exercise consumer choice, but sometimes there just isn't other options. And so then the pressure has to be put on at the producer, manufacturer level to say, okay, find an alternative and we can figure this out. Because plastics aren't infinitely recyclable. Whereas glass and paper are almost infinitely recyclable. So paper, you do get some breakdown, but I mean, you can reuse it multiple times. And glass is infinite. Every time you break it down into sand, you can re-blast it into glass. And so I think there's some shifting. And we always talk about that it's not a switch, right? Don't use the logic of you flip a switch and it's fixed, right? You have to use the logic that it's a dial. And you have a target and you're shifting the dial, and any movement on the dial is good, right? In the direction that you're aiming for. Hopefully you're not going the wrong way on the dial. But the conversations that we're having here, that's what you're aiming for. And so it does require patience and some tenacity and some long-term vision, and that has to happen on all the levels.
Kemi, you're a university professor. Do your students talk about recycling as one of the things that they try to do as feeling that they're making a difference?
So for me, as a researcher, there's not a lot of evidence that recycling is helping us move away from the production of plastic, right? So when we're saying we're going to recycle, we have to keep in mind that recycling is not even really a Band-Aid. It's a way to manage our waste. So it's very important for me to when we talk with the student to remind them that, like, you know, we are in an urgent crisis. Like the prediction on climate change, when I was younger in my undergrad 20 years ago, we weren't talking about some of the major shifts we're seeing, especially in the Atlantic Ocean, for example. So climate change crisis is accelerating. We're going to see more and more impact, and relying on recycling is just not going to solve the crisis. This is like a really tiny little way of fixing a tiny leak in a giant boat, right? So for me, when I'm talking with my student about action, I really try to make them understand that recycling is good if you have it in your hand and there's nothing else you can do. Sure, recycling, but it is not a large quantity of the recycling that is actually going to be recyclable at the end. So we really need to start thinking about how do we consume, how do we not get any of these single-use plastics in our hands. That's really the difference, right? Packaging, like when we order from Amazon, and I live in Corner Brook, so believe me, like it's difficult not to order from Amazon because it's a small place. And I'm sure a lot of listeners will agree with me that, like, well, if there's no Amazon, what do I do? But it is important to start thinking right away that every time you lose $1, you use it as a way to promote a machine and promote a way of living, right? So what do you want to do? If you are an environmentalist, well, think about where do you put your money. That's really important. What do you buy? What are you bringing home? And I agree with my colleagues here that, like, you know, it's not about stopping tomorrow. Like, it's not about that. It's about slowly transitioning away. But the more we move away from these plastic, and the recycling question is really something that, you know, the companies are passing on their externalities, so their impact onto the municipalities, onto us as consumers, right? Because really, like, shouldn't it be their responsibility to handle all that waste and thinking about their product in a circular way so that they can use their product at infinity? So for me, I recycling, for me, I understand its need, but as a researcher, I'm really starting to think about, well, it's not enough recycling. We shouldn't teach only about recycling because that's only a small part of it's going to be a very small part of the solution. Like, the solution is not going to come from recycling more. It's going to come from changing the way we think about our lives, the consumption we have in them, and how do we bring these products in our home. That's the real difficult tackling part of that. And that's not even thinking about how do we transport stuff around the world, because that's another big conversation. So recycling at the end is a very tiny tip of the iceberg. And so the conversation needs to go way beyond that to enact, like, effective climate action.
I loved what you had to say there, Camille, in a time when we're all, I think, watching our dollars and cents very closely, thinking about the difference we can make with that loonie. Do we want it to help the environment and to protect our children's future, or do we want to use it to support products that are really overpackaged in many cases and lots of plastic that we see on our products that we purchase?
And I think something for me, I've been really aiming to buy sustainable product, like especially in clothing. That's really something I love, fashion. So for me, trying to find good fashion product, like I'm really aware of the fast fashion trend. So I've been looking at companies that are sustainable, that give living wage, that are producing things in Canada. And yes, my clothes are more expensive, but they last so much longer. So I really see these sustainable products as an investment rather than having this really quick fix, thinking about them as long term. And it's also really nice to be able to look at a piece that you have in your wardrobe for the past 5 years and be like, oh my gosh, this jumpsuit is so amazing. It still looks great. You know, it feels really good. But that's my personal little fashion anecdote.
We're going to go to the phones. We do have a caller on the line. This is Earth Day, and we're talking about climate action. Richard is on the line from Portugal Cove. Good afternoon, Richard.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you?
We're doing fine, thanks. How are you today?
Well, reasonably okay. Now my computer things are fixed. Viruses and such like. Anyway.
Do you have any questions or a comment that you wanted to make today?
Well, I have some comments, and for sure. Sheila will probably know that my partner passed away recently.
I'm sorry.
We'll be planting trees for her. We're also going to hand out seedlings at the reception that we'll have for her, tree seedlings to people.
Beautiful.
That is a beautiful gesture for sure.
Yeah, but, I mean, I don't want to get any particular credit for it, but it's something you can do, and it's something that will be there for a long time, and it obviously does some good. In our own home, our garbage was down to as little as possible. We didn't put things in plastic bags in the supermarket and so forth if we could avoid it, and that sort of thing. So I agree there's a major problem there. And needs to be looked at. And I don't know what Sheila thinks about this, but I don't like what I'm seeing with the trees gone off of Dannyland and more and so on. So that's a major problem. Well, there's much more I could talk about, the little things that you do. But I will say that a heck of a lot of the mail that we get, and we restrict our mail somewhat, is unfortunately paper stuff sent from charities.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll stop there for a second and see what people have to say.
Richard, first of all, I want to say I'm very sorry for your loss, and I think it's wonderful what you're doing as a way to remember your late wife. What a lovely thing to do, to plant trees and hand out seedlings that will no doubt be here growing long after all of us are gone, which is just a lovely thought. Sheila, as the representative, I suppose, of the municipality of St. John's here today, what would you say about some of the other things that Richard had to say about trees being cut in new subdivisions, new developments?
Oh, you know what? Look, self-proclaimed tree hugger. I talk about the urban forest on a regular basis, and we're actually due to renew our master plan, our urban forest plan with the City of St. John's, and I've been pushing hard to ensure that we do that in a timely manner. As somebody, who saw some of these issues in other development areas, certainly Kenmount Terrace and other areas like that in the city where, there was clear cutting and then, you've got all these homes, you don't have any trees. So that was a big issue for me, still continues to be. We are limited by our present City Act. We're waiting for a new City Act, so we have more legislative control. But right now, we have enacted a tree policy where you have to reinstate trees. It's really difficult. Again, we go back to the balancing act between developers who are going in to build new homes and community, and we have to. I mean, we're in a dense community right now. Our population is growing. We have to build more homes. We're in a housing crisis. But how do we do it? It's all about the balancing act and making sure that we don't tear everything out. And when things do have to be taken down in order to provide the infrastructure for those new homes, we have to have a really solid plan of reinstating trees. And you know what? I commend you, Richard, for the actions that you're doing for your lovely wife. God bless her, and the great work that has been happening certainly in your own community in Portugal Cove, St. Phillips. You've certainly been great leaders in that municipality as well. I think that again, it's about the balancing act, but trees are huge. They're very, very important in the mix. So I commend you on that.
Richard, we do have another caller on the line, but do you have another thought or comment you'd like to share?
One very quick one. The more food we can grow for ourselves, the better. And I believe that apartment buildings ought to have allotments associated with them, so that the people who rent in those apartment buildings, and a lot of them don't have a lot of money, can grow their own food. So that's just the last thought. Okay, bye-bye.
Richard, thank you so much. And I want to read, Camille already raised this as an issue, so we have had a text from Kayla, and she says, I think it's so important to talk about the fast fashion industry when we are thinking about the climate crisis. Polyester is plastic, says Kayla, and that is the majority of clothing today. On an individual level, we can move away from fast fashion, but buy secondhand, and look to small companies who are doing better on the planet. So, Kayla, thank you very much for that text to our text line today. You can get in touch that way if you have something to share. 709-327-8206 is the number to call during the show. We do have another guest on the line, so I want to get to Sabine right now. Sabine Dietz is joining us on the line. She's the executive director of an organization based in Halifax, I believe. You can correct me, Sabine, but serving all of Atlantic Canada. Sabine, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about, and I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly, Climate-Atlantic? Is that right?
Climate-Atlantic.
Climate-Atlantic. And what is Climate-Atlantic?
So we're as you mentioned, an Atlantic Canada-wide organization, and while I am situated in Sackville, New Brunswick, the team is spread out across all of Atlantic Canada. So we've got almost 20 people, and really our purpose is to help people make better decisions under a changing climate. So managing the risks from climate change. So things like managing flooding, managing wildfires, and how they impact individual people as much as sectors or governments.
And what we've been talking about mostly here on the show today, I don't know how much you've had a chance to hear, Sabine, but has been about, mitigating our impact, reducing our impact on the environment, trying to fight off climate change. What you're talking about is climate adaptation. How do you explain that as being different from mitigation, perhaps?
Yeah, so it's not entirely different, but because we are locked into a changing climate, so climate is changing whether we want it or not right now, and so we got to manage what happens. And managing what happens, we need to be able to reduce the impacts that occur from such things as flooding events, right? So we're sort of at the other spectrum of so things are happening, and we need to make sure that people are safe, even though these things are happening. I would say, though, we often say that, adaptation is something that has to do with infrastructure, and it's got to do with building higher bridges, putting walls up, putting rocks down along the shore, preventing erosion. Yes, and there is a lot of other things that are linked to what we call adaptation. And I would say it's all connected to being resilient. And resiliency are also all the things that your previous guests have talked about. So whether it is recycling garbage, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, all of those are actions that increase our resiliency in light of a changing climate. So I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. So if I, for example, want to reduce my greenhouse gas emissions or carbon dioxide emissions, I may think about a solar panel. It reduces my cost for electricity, and I'm doing something good, and it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a really good thing to do. But at the same time, it actually increases my own resiliency. If I build in, for example, technology that allows me to continue drawing electricity from solar panels when my power is out, or if I have a battery pack, those are actually elements of adaptation because they make me more resilient if the power goes out. Let's say in case of a windstorm, I still have power. I can make sure that my freezer products, which maybe, I may have frozen in the summer a lot of food, which is really important because it reduces my cost. It increases my self-sufficiency. I may have frozen it. I may want to make sure that in case of a power outage, my food is actually not going to go bad. And so there's a direct link to adaptation, even when I think about a solar panel or when I think about putting a battery pack in. And the more practical things have more got to do with I mentioned flooding, I mentioned wildfire, we do have basements in many areas that do see water infiltration, whether it's in the spring or during heavy rainfall events. And there's actions individuals can take to reduce flooding from occurring within their own basement, right? So there are really direct links to what your guests talked about earlier and what we're more focusing on, which is the preparation or being resilient to those changes.
Sabine, who do you typically work with? And what kinds of challenges are they facing that bring them to you?
Well, thinking about Atlantic Canada, we face everything, right? We face hurricanes, we face windstorms, we face winter power outages, we face erosion along our shorelines, and all of those impact everybody. They may be sectors such as the tourism industry, they may be the construction industry, they may be individuals who have their tourism operation close to the shoreline or who operate in the winter and who see the winter weather changing, so they can't operate the same way. and there may be governments who are looking for advice, because a lot has to do with understanding what a changing climate actually looks like. And once you know that and understand that, you can make decisions that are based on that understanding. And so anybody comes to us literally to ask for support, advice, finding information, discussing options, all of that.
Sabine, how can people find you online if they want to find out more about Climb Atlantic?
It's our website, climeatlantic.ca. Very simple.
Okay. Sabine, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That is Sabine Dietz, Executive Director of Climb Atlantic, joining us on the line to talk about climate adaptation. And we've seen, of course, evidence in our own province, in Port Basque, perhaps most notably, with Hurricane Fiona and the devastation in that community. And the fact that now homes are being built further back from the shoreline, something that we all probably would never have imagined would happen. Sheila, for you as a municipal leader, what do you see as some of the things that the City of St. John's needs to do to be more, as we talked about earlier, resilient and to be adapting on an ongoing basis to what's happening with climate?
Well, one of the biggest ones, and I can say it as I just look out the studio window, is wetland preservation. Certainly, we've done a very extensive deep dive and in terms of wetland delineation, certainly in the City of St. John's. Of course, we'd run across many developers coming to the city to want to build in a particular area, and we didn't have the data, we didn't have the research to understand, is this what was deemed a significant wetland? And so we started the hard work of going down and engaging and doing, focusing on wetlands and what ones were really important to the scheme of things, which ones needed to be protected, which ones were not, so that we could develop appropriately in the city and ensure that we're not going to continue to flood people's basements, for example. And also, it's also a balance about being fair to the developers in the community, the people who are building the homes and that are badly needed. So we want to make sure that we're sending clear messages to them about where they can and cannot develop. So that was a really important exercise that the City of St. John's just went through. And I think that that's going to have a lot of impacts, certainly, for the future. We're dealing with a lot of river coastal erosion issues as well, too, with the Waterford River, things like that, because obviously there's a lot of homes and businesses that are neighboring that particular river that pours right into our harbor. These are things that we have been tasking, and we're continuing to go that route. So, I think that's one of the more significant ones for sure.
Ashley, anything that comes to mind as you hear Sheila talking about climate adaptation? In terms of the kinds of issues that you deal with your clients, and how they're not only thinking about reducing and their impact, but also adapting perhaps the way that they are doing business.
So for us, whenever we speak about it, they're not separate issues. So the more we mitigate, the less we'll have to adapt, and the less we mitigate, the more we'll have to adapt. So there's a certain amount that's already kind of baked in. Even if we could somehow magically cut off all additional carbon contributions to the atmosphere, there would still there are still outcomes that we will have to adapt to. But for us, it's about making choices that or supporting our clients to make choices that both reduce emissions and increase resilience. And so, we always present a graphic that sort of shows a graph where what you're looking for is low carbon, high resilience, right? And so there's a quadrant on that graph that you're always aiming for. And so that's just sort of a logical approach to how you need to go ahead and make decisions, but that adaptation is just as important as mitigation, because if a municipality is unable to provide like core public services or core public infrastructure, like it won't matter if you have solar panels on your roof if your house is flooded, right? So those they go hand in hand, and whenever we approach problem solving or ideation or trying to create solutions or strategies for people, they come all in the same table when we're looking at it.
We do have a caller on the line. Philip is on the line from Campbellton. Good afternoon, Philip.
Good afternoon. Yeah, very interesting topic and badly needed. On Easter Sunday morning, I had a lamb born. This is a heritage breed that I'm trying to bring back. And it felt like a minus 14 out, blowing wind and snow and everything. That lamb would have died if I hadn't had solar panels and batteries on the roof of my farmhouse. I had power when the power went out.
Wow.
That was critical. So I've been trying to get resilient and sustainable and harmonious since 1970, and the things that I've been doing really do pay off, and they're kind of systemic. If they're like a chain. Once all the links are in there, it can be very strong. But if you don't get all the links in there, then it's still a pretty weak chain or short anyway. But that saved the life of that lamb, and is going to help me bring back the exploits island sheep, which are also the source of things like trigger mitts and sweaters, which can keep us warm in our harsh climate.
So it all comes full circle, Philip.
Absolutely. We've got to save the heritage that we've been blessed with and realize that that can be projected into the future because it enabled us to survive in the past.
Philip, what inspired you to have those solar panels installed, to make the decision to go to a form of solar energy and to have that investment? Because I'm sure that cost quite a bit of money.
Oh, yeah. It's just the right thing to do. When we have a technology which is the lowest cost source of electricity, which is a very highly valued source of energy because there's so many things you can do with it, it's just the right thing to do. And even in Newfoundland, we do have enough of it. But we do have to have some form of storage, whether it's batteries or thermal or something else. But I enjoy doing things like that because it puts me in harmony with the world around me.
Philip, thank you so much for calling in.
You're welcome. Thank you for the program.
That's Philip in Campbellton. Camille, I want to bring you into the conversation. We just heard Philip talk about doing things because it's the right thing to do. And I want to kind of turn our attention. We've got about, 10 minutes or so left in the program. And I want to ask you what you think people should be looking for in this election campaign now. What should be top of mind for them in terms of listening closely to what they want to be hearing, I guess, from the candidates before they cast their vote? What's the right things to be listening for? What are the right questions to be asking?
I think for me, when I'm thinking about climate action, it's really hard for me to disentangle them from social justice. One of the biggest challenges that we'll face in the green transition or this transition away from fossil fuel is that the way it's kind of getting set up right now, the people that have been rich and have profited from the green, the oil and gas are likely kind of positioned to also profit from the green transition. And I think that's really against my personal value in the sense that for me, when we're thinking about a green transition, I want that transition to also be just, which means that everyone gets a life that is worth living, that they're excited, that they're happy, bread and roses, obviously. So for me, when I'm listening to the political leader, I'm looking for a strong commitment towards climate action. So not just promises that we'll think about it or we'll look into it, but things that have concrete, hopefully budget line, but also concrete plans, right? Plans about adaptation and mitigation that will support everyone. And something to me that's really important is also social justice, right? If we're having a government that says that they're going to push forward with really strong climate action, but is ranting against trans people, for example, well, this to me is not a way to go forward in fighting climate change. The fight for climate change is a fight that should be about a green and just transition so that all of us can live in a place where it's livable, but also live a life that is comfortable and that is a great place to live it. So when I'm looking for social justice, I'm really making sure that women are at the forefront of the conversation as an equity-driven group, and LGBTQ people, trans people, disabled people, and our elders. So for me, when I'm looking at these political platforms, I'm really thinking of it as a holistic perspective, because for me, climate action without social justice is really not supporting my ideal of the future. We know climate change will exacerbate the inequalities we have in our society. So we cannot afford a government that will increase these inequalities. We need to be very mindful that the green transition will need to happen. It is a climate urgency. We are going to see more impact. We are going to see more need for adaptation, and it's going to cost us more money if we don't act now. So I want a government that is in that mindset. We're going to act now, and we're going to be inclusive so that anyone can benefit from that transition.
Sheila, what about for you? What's top of mind for you when you think about this federal election campaign in particular? As you referenced earlier, we've got a provincial election and municipal elections coming up later this year. So what do you think people should be asking the people who want to sit in places of government on our behalf? What kinds of questions with climate action in mind?
Well, first of all, I would love to just comment on the social justice aspect, because I grew out of social justice, and that's the reason why I'm in municipal politics right now. So again, the holistic approach, I really appreciate that. I think that it's extremely important that we task our leaders with really bold actions. I mean, it's been very soft, our approach. And you know what? As soon as we see on the all of the conflict that's happened with our tariff wars that have happened, of course, the conversation immediately became binary. And you know what? Yes, I think that there's incredible opportunities in this really challenging time that we're having right now. It's time for Canada to figure out how to support local. How do we support? We can trade within ourselves, but how we can support each other. And I think that smart leaders will find those opportunities, and I think that they need to be asked. Down at the municipal level with the City of St. John's, we've had some great success in recent time with the proliferation of our multi-use trail system. We had a tough time trying to incorporate it all, and then came up with a plan for a multi-use trail system which allows people of all sorts, people with disabilities, people walking, biking, strollers, wheelchairs, to access, these invaluable resources in the city, because they are so important, and it is a part of the whole holistic plan as well. It's not just about waste management, but it's about making our lives better, for our minds, for our bodies, for our spirits. And, I think that has to be an ongoing approach. But yes, we need to task our leaders, and we need to be bold about it. And certainly that's, again, why I certainly am passionate as a lead for sustainability with the City of St. John's, but also why I signed on to that bold open letter from Climate Caucus, the Elbows Up for Climate Action. That's exactly what they're doing. They're tasking the leaders right now.
Ashley, when you think about climate action at the policy level in government and in organizations that, work on our behalf in the communities and across the country, what comes to mind for you, and what kinds of questions do you think people should be asking about the climate action they'd like to see at the policy level?
This conversation comes up in our household all the time. So when I talk to most recently I've talked to my kids about it. And when I talk to them about it, I say, like, you need to critically evaluate what's being said to you. So there's rhetoric like, live and let live. Except is that rhetoric being used to justify inaction, which is in fact a choice? And what does inaction actually mean? And and are what's being said by whoever is speaking, are they telling you about things they're going to do, or are they only telling you about things that they think the other party is doing wrong? Because that's not helpful. Like, setting a boundary and knowing what constraints are, that's helpful, but not when that's your core message. And so, I think it would have to be obvious that, like, I'm pro climate change and I'm pro bold action and I'm pro all of these things for my own personal politics. But in terms of, like, the divisiveness and, like, the radicalization that's happening, like, across politics everywhere, what concerns me is that it's more about rhetoric and building strong emotion, and it's less about concrete policy statements. And that's very concerning for me, because that means that people are either so overwhelmed that they're not able to check their own facts, right? And that's concerning in and of itself, that we've gotten to a place where people don't have the time to critically evaluate something. And that's generally concerning. But what I always say to my kids is that, like, it's okay for you to have an agenda as a speaker. That's okay, right? Like, that's what political parties are for. And if someone's going to get up and say a speech, like, they have an agenda. They want something from that conversation. All human interactions are on some level transactional. So that's okay, but you need to understand, like, the core of their agenda, and then you have to decide whether you agree with that agenda or not, or if that agenda comes from a kindness or an empathy or a total, like, a social justice, or are we really, like, are we really rising a tide that lifts all the ships, or are we only rising a tide that lifts a couple of ships? Mm-hmm. And that it's really important as a voter that you get out and vote and exercise that right. And even if you can't fact check, like, just really listen to what the speaker is saying, and really think about, are they trying to tell me a message? Are they telling me what they're doing? Or are they only trying to throw someone else under the bus and say that, like, if I throw this person under the bus, I'll magically make everything okay? And that, like, the latter of those two options says to me that they can't possibly have something that's worth saying or doing or have the courage of their own convictions if they're not able to come out and say it straight. So that's sort of my position on politics in general.
Ashley, I'm so glad I asked you that. I think that's wonderful advice for all of us, really, as we're navigating these last few days now of this federal election campaign. With just a few minutes left in the show, I want to come back to each of you and ask you, where do you gather your hope? Is there something in particular you'd point to that right now gives you hope when it comes to climate action? Camille?
Whoa, that's a tough question. What gives me hope? I think what gives me hope is when I get in my classroom with my undergraduate student, and despite all the madness out there and all the crazy things we tell them about climate change and how it's overwhelming and full of anxiety, they still want to get out there, put their boots on, and work hard to make it happen. So I think we all need to put our boots on and make it happen, but I'm reminded when I see them that it's also my job to do that, but I'm not alone. There are more people than just I, and I think that gives me hope and that sense of community.
I love that. Sheila, what about for you? Where do you find hope these days in the midst of, obviously, we could dwell on the negatives, but is there a particular win that you see or something that inspires you?
Well, I would agree as well that I think it's the students. I think it's the young people coming up the pipe. The experiences that I've had with some of the students that are involved in political science and equity, gender equity and other issues and other departments here with the university, I am just in awe of the incredible brains that are coming out of the institutions. And honestly, that's where I get hope. That's where people are passionate, but they're also really informed. They're critical thinkers, as Ashley's, certainly speaking to. That is important because they're now, but they are the future leaders. And that's where I get really, really inspired because honestly, folks, we're only here for a minute. We're passing the baton. So, let's leave the place a little bit better than we found it. And, so that's where I get inspiration. Yep.
Wonderful. Ashley, a final word to you. I can only give you about 30 seconds, however. Where do you find hope these days?
It's in the work that we're able to do. So the clients come to us we drive real impact, real change. We build relationships. Those relationships build other relationships. And we measure our impact. We know how many dollars we brought to climate action in the province. We know how much emissions we've reduced by projects that we've enabled. And so whenever it gets really discouraging, I just sort of go back to, okay, there are people doing stuff and, I can be a part of that and I can be a part of that change.
All right. Ashley Smith, thank you very much for joining us in studio. Sheila O'Leary, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And Camille Ouellette-Dallaire, thank you very much for being in our studio as well.
Ça fait plaisir.
Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day, everyone.